This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On January 29th, the Security Studies Committee held its first roundtable of the spring 2014 season. Our guest was Reza Akhlagi, senior writer at the Foreign Policy Association, a prestigious policy institution in the United States founded in 1918 and based in Manhattan, New York. Mr. Akhlagi spoke on Iran and the emergence of a new geopolitical order in the Middle East.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your warm welcome today. And my sincerest thanks as well to Chris Corrigan and Eric Morse for their generous support, and to the Royal Canadian Military Institute for making this talk possible. It is indeed a very interesting time to talk about Iran, a country that is so frequently in the news these days. Interestingly enough, in a week's time, it will be the 35th anniversary of the 1979 Iranian Revolution that ousted the Shah and brought the Islamic Republic in power. In a few moments, I'll be talking about Iran and the emergence of what appears to be a new geopolitical order in the Middle East, an order that could greatly change how we think of international relations and energy security. I'll start with a historical snapshot of Iran, then I'll move on to the latest developments that were put into motion by the election of President Hassan Rouhani last June, and the change in the Iranian political scene that followed. Next, I'll discuss this recent interim nuclear agreement between Iran and world's 6 major powers, known as P5+1, and I'll offer a strategic analysis of its impact on key regional states vis-a-vis their relations with Iran. Now, let's take a look at Iran in a snapshot. Throughout ancient history, the Persians were at the center of global power rivalries, with 2 specific periods representing 2 dynasties, the Achaemenid and the Sassanid dynasties, from which Persia emerged as a key player on the international stage. The Iranian Empire, under these 2 dynasties, was in bitter rivalry, first with the Greeks during the Achaemenid dynasty, and later with the Romans during the Sassanid dynasty. The Achaemenids were the longest living empire in history to be defeated by the Alexander the Great. The Arab invasion of Persia took place in the 7th century AD. This led to the collapse of the Sassanid dynasty and the arrival of Islam in Iran. In view of Persia's history, when analyzing Iranian affairs today, it is therefore very, very important to know that imperial rule and imperial glory have been engraved on the Iranian national psyche. And many behavioral analyses of Iranian leaders and their foreign policy conduct, irrespective of their ideology, should take into account this imperial mindset, which has also been a factor in the Iranians' perceived sense of exceptionalism and their perceived sense of superiority over other countries in the region. Today, Iran is a country of 77 million people, with 75% of the population under the age of 35, with women comprising almost 70% of the country's university student body, and with a very high number of university graduates. Iran is largely an urban society. In post-revolutionary Iran, the extension of post-secondary education to rural areas, including the poorest parts of the country, set in motion a dramatic process of urbanization. This massive investment in education, as well as in rural infrastructure, has resulted in the growth of a well-educated and an increasingly connected middle class. This is in addition to the urbanization trend that existed under the Shah. So we're looking at a span of 65 years in which education and urbanization changed Iran's cultural, social, economic, and power dynamics. In 1979, the leaders of the revolution had envisioned the rural areas of the country as its center of gravity, and rural values, rather than Western ones, prevailing. As we see today, the Iranian constitution is a mix of values taken from Western liberal democracies, as well as principles of Shiite branch of Islam. It's a mix of both. Iran has one of the highest rates of Facebook users in the region. Using filtering technology, millions of Iranians log onto Facebook and other social media sites. Now, why do I say this? Because in a few moments, I will explain the significance of these developments on Iran's current power dynamics and how they're impacting the country's geopolitical position in the region. Now, let's take a brief look at the Iranian armed forces. Iran's armed forces consist of the regular army and the Revolutionary Guard, each with its own air, ground, and naval forces. There is also a separate air defense armed forces unit specifically focused on air defenses. The army and the Revolutionary Guard number almost 600,000 in total. There is also the paramilitary Basij force, a force designed to control internal social unrest and also trained to defend urban centers in the event of a foreign invasion. The Basij force is estimated at between 100,000 and 120,000. Now, let's take a look at the 2013 presidential elections that took place last year, June. The Iranian presidency is modeled after the United States, with 2 4-year terms. After 8 years of what is widely believed to be the 2-term disastrous presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, elections were held in June of last year. As you know, President Hassan Rouhani emerged victorious in that election. President Rouhani comes from a very strong background in Iran's intelligence and national security establishments, including involvement in the country's nuclear dossier and in the Iran-Iraq war. Rouhani studied law at the University of Tehran, then obtained his master and PhD degrees at the Caledonian University in Glasgow, Scotland. As you know, he's a cleric. During his presidential campaign, Rouhani ran on a platform of political moderation, opening the country to the West, and a bold promise to end Iran's nuclear crisis and international isolation. It's interesting to note that during the campaign, Rouhani fiercely attacked Ahmadinejad and his economic, social, and nuclear policies. Among key legacies of Ahmadinejad's presidency are Iran's horrendous economic mismanagement, its steep economic dive, the rise of corruption to breathtaking levels, and the unprecedented isolation of Iran on the international stage. Now, let's take a look at what brought the Iranian leadership to the table to negotiate seriously. What happened? Looking back, it's important to know that there were no credible sanctions against Iran since the revolution, even under the administration of George W. Bush. During the Ahmadinejad presidency, however, the leadership in Iran came to see the very heavy costs and limits of an ideologically driven foreign policy, a policy which never took the international community seriously. The Obama administration, however, managed to put together a comprehensive international sanctions regime against Iran that included even Russia and China, Iran's de facto allies. The sanctions today have brought the country's economy to its knees. After these developments, the Iranian leadership saw on the horizon the prospects of economic collapse and social unrest. Parallel to the above developments, another important happening is taking place in the structure of the Iranian government and in the corridors of power in Tehran. Many young Iranians entering the government and state institutions, even though seemingly supporters of the government, are connected to the world, to the outside world, and seem to place very little value on the ideological and revolutionary principles that made Iran the theocracy that it is today. They have strong business acumen and would like to do business with the outside world, including the West. This generational shift within Iran's corridors of power is bound to have a long-term impact on how social policy and foreign policy are formulated and conducted in Iran. Iran today is a country in dire need of foreign investment, with a population hungry for social change and very high rates of university degree graduates, but with very high unemployment, indescribable corruption, widespread drug use, and prostitution in all cities. These are in the backdrop of an Iranian economy in the tight control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Today, it is nearly impossible in Iran to have a lucrative business without strong connections to the Revolutionary Guard. If behind every successful man there is a woman, one can argue that in Iran, behind every successful business, there is the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard control every sector of the economy. They control the flow of capital, ports, mining, even import of high-value consumer products. They intervene in the stock market. They are also believed to be in the distribution of alcoholic beverages in the black market, which are consumed in large quantities at private parties across Iran, and considered to be one of the most profitable businesses in the country. So one of the unenviable tasks of President Rouhani, as demonstrated in Davos last week in Switzerland, is to attract foreign investment to a country that is in serious need of economic reform and economic transparency. Now, the question is, where does the Supreme Leader fit in this picture? Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. There are intense rivalries within the Revolutionary Guard today over the management of economic resources. Factional rivalries in Iran's power structure are increasingly outside Khamenei's sphere of influence. Some factions are very much interested in pulling Iran out of isolation and doing business with Western multinationals, while other factions are worried about transparency and opening up to the West, and as a result, fearful of losing their lucrative position in the Iranian market. Iran's corridors of power are undergoing a generational shift, a generation that, though seemingly loyal to the regime, is connected to the world and aware of business and financial opportunities. They seem to have very little interest in clerical ideological principles. This generation expresses its religiosity increasingly outside of contexts traditionally controlled by the clergy. Therefore, they are detached from the Supreme Leader's guidance. So I would strongly argue that the lifespan of Supreme Leadership, of the Supreme Leadership in Iran as an institution is over. It has run its course. Now, let's take a look at the region Now, within these developments and changes in Iran and the recent nuclear agreement, what the region is looking at Iran, key regional states. The following are some of the key points that one should take into consideration when looking at the region. Egypt. Egypt is in turmoil. Many observers believe that the situation in Egypt can only get worse before getting any better. The rise of Sunni extremists in Syria, chiefly supported and funded by the Saudis, and the unprecedented levels of violence exercised by both Assad and Sunni extremists have made a lot of people worry about the prospects of creating another Afghanistan, this time in the Levant region, with potentially devastating security implications for Israel, Turkey, and Jordan. The recent mortar attack against Israel was the work of Sunni fighters in Syria fighting the Assad regime. The Obama administration decided not to roll back the Iranian influence in the region at the cost of creating a jihadist haven in Syria and in the wider region. A jihadist haven would certainly turn its attention to Israel, which it did recently, and would not hesitate from making life difficult for Israelis. The US tries to counter Sunni radicalism by not allowing the influence of Shiite Iran to be completely compromised. That's a strategic vision in the Obama administration. And let's be clear, the Saudis will do their utmost to defeat this strategy. Speaking of Saudis, now the Saudis are in a very difficult situation, impacted by both internal and external factors. And I want to elaborate on those internal and external factors. Saudi Arabia is perhaps the only remaining country in the world that takes its name from a ruling family, and that is the Al Saud. The internal factors. The Saudi royal family has been in an alliance with the Wahhabi religious elite, led by the Council of Sunni Senior Ulama, an alliance that is bitterly opposed to the freedom of thought and individualism. Wealth disparities and government inefficiencies are widespread in Saudi Arabia today, and many young Saudis seem fed up with this. This is undermining loyalty to the royals, and the religious establishment has become increasingly subservient to the political needs of the royals, leading to the erosion of its legitimacy, the religious establishment's legitimacy, and that of their royal family. There are prospects of internal instability in Saudi Arabia as a result of frustration with the royal family and what many people in Saudi Arabia and outside observers believe to be the royals' incompetence in bridging the wealth gap. The external factors. Today, the kingdom is deeply concerned about its external environment for the following reasons. US-Iranian rapprochement seems to continue on its intended track. Developments in Egypt and Syria have made the Saudi leadership grow deeply distrustful of the Obama administration and of the Americans. And given the developments in Iran's nuclear dossier, they seem to have become openly obsessed with Iran. Prince Abdul Rahman Al Faisal, former commander of the Saudi royal force, is widely believed to be behind financing and arming some of the most violent Sunni groups in Syria. Oil prices are bound to go down in the near future, pressuring the Saudis both externally and internally. And how about Turkey, one of the major regional states? How Turkey views Iran? Just in a bracket, let me tell you that yesterday Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan arrived in Tehran. Turkey is in the midst of a major internal revolt within its power institutions. Serious differences with Iran over Syria have given way recently to a more conciliatory environment due to the changing dynamics in the Syrian conflict. The recent corruption scandal revealed how Turkey has been consistently and effectively undermining US-led sanctions against Iran, a major embarrassment for Erdogan's government, which has stunned many in the world for its deep involvement in corrupt business and political practices. Looking at Iran, the Turkish leadership is gradually preparing for a not-so-distant future in which it would have to compete with Iran for foreign investment and for expansion of Iranian influence in the Caucasus and Central Asia regions. How about Israel? Let's take a look at Israel, how the Israelis look at Iran. Over the next few months, we will most likely see a change of tone and narrative from the Israeli side. There are signs of it everywhere. It would mostly be about transformation of Israeli-Iranian conflict into Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel is very concerned about the sectarian warfare in its backyard. Mounting strength of extremist Sunni groups in Syria and Iraq is a serious concern for the Israelis. However, there have been a number of strategic gains for Israel in the middle of this turmoil. One, a seemingly growing gap between Hamas and Iran. Two, heavy Hezbollah casualties in the Syrian war. Three, the Syrian army's military capabilities have been greatly diminished by the country's civil conflict. And some thoughts for the future. From this point on, the quality of the leadership in Iran will play a key role in improving Iran's standing on the international stage. Economic interests of various factions in Iran could determine the pace of President Rouhani's success. There are other variables at play. Breakdown of negotiations between Iran and the West, the Saudis' success in spreading the Sunni-Shiite conflict to a wider region, and potential collapse or something like of assassination of Assad. Now, it has been 3 decades that we have not seen an Iran with a dynamic economy and an emerging private sector, which at present are virtually non-existent. We have yet to see the impact it will have, such a development would have on the region and beyond. So we could very well be on the cusp of a major shift in regional stability, energy security, and regional alliances. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions.
That was very, very good, very interesting.
Thank
I
you.
must say I followed you online, and I'm very impressed with your writings, Reza.
Thank you.
I wonder if you might just expand a little bit on your discussion concerning Israel. Do you see any action against Iran in Israel?
From the Israeli side, the answer to that question is a resounding no. The Israelis and the Iranians are very, very well aware of each other's capabilities. Iran would never launch an attack against Israel, irrespective of what the media hype says, because they know they're going to be confronted with a major nuclear power, Israel, and another country called a global superpower, the United States. And Israelis, on the other hand, know that if Iranians attack Israel, the massive loss of life of Israel is unbearable. It would be simply unbearable. The very high casualties that the Iranians can inflict upon Israel, and so we're talking about two regional superpowers that do not want to mess around with each other, so to speak.
You mentioned Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Afghanistan, not Pakistan. And my understanding is that they still maintain their status as a nuclear power. All too often when we have these sorts of discussions, people skirt Pakistan. What's your view?
The focus of my talk was on the Middle East. Pakistan is certainly part of Southwest Asia and also Central Asian politics. However, if I want to say something about Pakistan, is that the Pakistanis are under pressure and would most likely be under pressure from the Saudis because of the financial power that the Saudis exert in Pakistan. And the Saudis could reach out to the Pakistanis for more military cooperation. There are talks of potential request on the part of Saudis for the Pakistanis to provide them with a nuclear umbrella. It's too early and premature discussion, but some people think that would come into play. Pakistan is a state that is has its own very serious internal problems, chiefly with the religious Islamic extremists, very bad an economy that is in a very bad shape. And Pakistan is not an influencer. It doesn't have the ability to influence events in the Middle East. But Pakistan could be soon, in a not so distant future, a player within the Central Asian energy politics.
And they enjoy a border with Iran.
They have a long border with Iran. They have generally good relations with Iran. They're very careful in their relations with Iran because they need Iran for energy purposes, and also they even though the Sunnis in Pakistan, extremist Sunnis in Pakistan, including Taliban, are fiercely anti-Iranian. Pakistan, the state, the central government, keeps its distance from their ideology because they have historically had very good relations with Iran diplomatically, and they want to benefit from the expansion of Iran's energy sector that could take place in not so distant future. So they're very diplomatic in their relations with Iran, and they have done a fair amount of work in containing their Sunni extremists and Taliban from inflicting pain on Iran, even though they haven't been, of course, 100% successful. Dr. Charles.
Given the high level of unemployed, highly educated male students and graduates in a police state, how much longer do you expect this state to last?
Okay. The Iranian state, even though it's a dictatorship, it's a theocracy, the Iranian state is fairly dynamic. And the dynamism that you see in Iran doesn't exist in other sort of dictatorships. They became serious, came to the table precisely. One of the key factors was what you just mentioned. They see massive unemployment, an incredible brain drain. Just drive to University of Waterloo and see the Iranian student population. Iran's brightest are there at the University of Waterloo studying engineering. A massive brain drain, and the prospects of social unrest brought them to the table. They are very well aware of the fact that they should do something. It's not clear how much longer the Islamic Republic of Iran can last, because in Iran it's a very difficult business to predict what's going to happen. For example, many people last year were predicting that Saeed Jalili, the chief nuclear negotiator under President Ahmadinejad, a very well-known hardline from the hardline factions, would definitely take the presidency. And people were surprised by the election of Hassan Rouhani. Many Iranians, millions of Iranians voted for Hassan Rouhani because of his platform of moderation and some of his speeches that sat very well with the young Iranians. And the government did not have a choice but to count his votes. They were not in a position to rig the votes the way they did in 2009.
Okay.
Hi, Reza. Quick question. As you rightly mentioned, it's very hard to predict anything in that region. One thing which will happen for sure is that one day Khamenei will pass away.
Yes.
What do you think might happen?
That's a very good question. The Revolutionary Guards, as we speak today, are preparing for Khamenei's departure. And Khamenei is losing the extent of his influence in making things happen. Khamenei, the rivalries in Iran, the factional rivalries in Iran, when the way those factional rivalries are underway in Iran, they don't take into consideration Khamenei's status. Khamenei doesn't have the charisma that Ayatollah Khomeini had. He's not a charismatic leader, and however, he has a massive wealth, control over very wealthy foundations in Iran, numbering tens of billions of dollars. His extent of influence is there. He's very powerful financially, but he doesn't seem to be able to influence factional rivalries within Iran. And those factional rivalries, most of them take place within the Sepah, or the Revolutionary Guard. And when Khamenei departs or dies, the Sepah, the Persian word for the Revolutionary Guard, the Revolutionary Guard will be more present, and their key concern would be security and social order. They're going to be seen even. They're going to be even more pronounced. Their presence is going to be more pronounced until they decide for what to do after Khamenei. The most credible rumors, and most likely this is what's going to happen, they're going to set up a group of people, a consultation group of people made of clerics and non-clerics after Khamenei. The chances of putting somebody as a new supreme leader are low.
And what do you make of his son's alignment?
No, his sons don't have a chance. They don't. They're very influential financially, but they can't decide the political future of Iran.
Okay. I really enjoyed your talk. I thought it was really informative.
Thank you.
And I just recently went to another talk with John Bell at the Toledo International Center for Peace, and the focus of his talk was the pivot of the U.S. policy from the Middle East to China. So I was wondering, to what extent do you believe that the U.S. policy of this pivot will affect Iran's relations with the U.S. and also Iran's foreign relations with other Middle Eastern states?
The U.S. pivot to Asia is going to take place. The U.S. is reducing its commitment to its allies in the Middle East. That's for sure. And the Saudis are very concerned. The Egyptians are terribly disappointed. And because of the energy revolution in the United States does not have the same strategic imperatives that it did have in the Middle East. It used to have. And because, and this is very key, because you are dealing with a population. Okay, look at this building here. This building is owned by a group of anti-Americans. But all the people here inside this building are fiercely pro-American. So the owners of this building are in trouble, or they have to change their mentality. That's a strategic asset for the United States. Unlike almost everywhere in the Middle East, you are dealing with a well-educated young population, very pro-American, They would love to do business with the outside world. They even, it's interesting that many Iranians save money desperately, even with that economic situation, so that they can take a trip to Paris for 1 week or even 4 days and come back to Tehran so that they can see the West. Oh, now, this is Paris. Yes. And that's their attitude. And they emulate Western way of life. They are seriously detached from principles, revolutionary principles. Now, if Iran, and this is also what Nouriel Louroubini, the economist, the famous American economist Nouriel Louroubini, who's Iranian Jewish, and Ian Bremmer recently said that if Iran mends its relations with the U.S. and the economic and the trade relations resume, and the sanctions are lifted, Iran will be an ally of the United States, not on the paper, but by nature. And Iran will have enormous influence in the region. And that's what worries a lot of Arab states. Because Iran can feel the vacuum, has the ability, because of its potentials, has the ability to feel the vacuum if the United States is completely does completely withdrawn from the region, which is not possible. The United States will always have military presence in the Persian Gulf and in the surrounding regions.
Eric, or not this old Eric, but you, sir. That you, I'm sorry. Yeah.
What about the inflation of the rial inside Iran? What has been the effect of that, and what steps might be taken in the future to mend Iran's economic policy and to combat the inflation of the currency?
Ahmadinejad is a president that managed to destroy the Iranian economy without going to war with any country. So, and that's an amazing achievement. And one of my friends basically put on his Facebook that he is jokingly, just to give you an idea of what he did to the Iranian economy, he put on his Facebook that the Ahmadinejad is getting requests from Harvard Business School, Wharton, Schulich School of Business, Rodman School of Business, to teach how to destroy an economy without going to war. So that's one of his key achievements. And that's good for Israelis. I mean, if I were an Israeli, I mean, thank you. You did a great job. I didn't use any of my pilots. I didn't use any of my fighter jets. I didn't use one single bullet, and you destroyed the economy of my key enemy, my key competitor in the region. Now, the rial was the devaluation of rial was mainly because of Ahmadinejad's policies, and as a result of his policies, the Iranian purchasing power was reduced by 1/4, and many Iranians here in Canada suffered greatly because they were enjoying exchanging money coming from Iran and driving there, and Iranians in Toronto are known for their obsession with BMW and Mercedes, and many. This is in Toronto. This happened in Toronto. Many Iranian families that were dependent on these exchange rates, they ended up returning their BMWs and Mercedes-Benz to the dealerships. It's happened a lot in Toronto. Now, the sanctions made it even worse. So the Iranians saw their purchasing power reduced by 1/4. So if I could buy something for $1, now I have to buy for $4 or 4 tomans. The sanctions even made that situation worse. But that was due to Ahmadinejad policies.
There was a bit of I think a feeling that Iran for a long time, being a trading nation for 1,000 years,
yes,
had a different or a real connection to diplomacy and throughout the region, seen as an honest broker by many in the diplomatic community, and that Canada for a long time, probably 40 years, shared that connection here, that Canada was the honest broker in the West for a lot of those policies. So it seems there's a push within the diplomatic service to re-engage, so that diplomatic ability to service those issues are critical. What's your thought on that?
That's basically track to diplomacy that some in Canada, like Peter Jones, are advocating. Track to diplomacy under the government of Stephen Harper was watered down, and because of the policies that we adopted over the past few years, the ability to communicate and build connections with Iran, where those abilities were greatly diminished. Now, based on my understanding from what the Foreign Minister, Mr. Byrd, says, is that over this 6 month period, Canada will not try to engage with Iran. Canada wants to play wait and see policy. And I can share with you my interview with Janet Stein of the Monk School and of Global Affairs. She told me that in that interview that Canada is going to wait for this 16 month period, because she made a good point. She says it's a very delicate situation period within these 6 months. So after these 6 months, Canada will adopt most likely a new policy toward Iran, and also Israelis will move. If anything goes well, if everything goes smoothly, the Israelis would most likely come up with a new set of strategic imperatives for Israel.
It's absolutely delicious listening to your analysis, and two things I would just appreciate your comments on. You described the position of Israel and Iran almost analogous to the Cold War, where you had a bipolar world, and the Russians and the Americans. There was a certain security. They didn't have the wild card of Saudi Arabia, and maybe you could comment on that. My second point is, although Iran has the precedent of that revolution in 1979, my thoughts are, even though as you described the high level of education, I would add to that particularly women.
Yes.
The number of women parliamentarians, I believe,
Yes.
in Iran exceeds any other country that I can think of. And that wonderful trip to Paris. We all think that's great. But also the engagement of the social network. And all of those dynamics don't lead me, you were going to comment, to get any sense that there's anything stirring in the way of revolution.
The majority of Iranians, young Iranians, are bitterly critical of their parents for 1979 revolution, and it's in the it is part of the lunch and dinner discussions. They openly tell their parents, "You screwed our adult life, our young years. We don't want to live under this theocracy." And just to give you an idea of how fed up they are, in Iran it is, and Fred also knows, my good friend Fred. In Iran, it is not uncommon to go to a party where we call those parties in the West wild parties. Let me put it that way. And in many of these parties, they do all sorts of things without getting into details. And it's interesting that they serve you along with because it's widely available. In addition to food and fruit, they serve you cocaine in those parties. Maybe Rob Ford would like to go there. They serve you all sorts of narcotics. And going back to Israel. Now your question is revolution, they are afraid, Iranians are very afraid of the word revolution because of what they saw that what the revolution did to their lives, to their parents, to the country. And they're very disturbed by the negative image of Iran in the outside world. They're very disturbed by it. And most of them would love to get a passport other than Iranian passport so that they can travel and they don't looked upon with a negative image. The possibility of social revolt in Iran is very low because of the experience that their parents had. And they look at the Shah's images, the relationship that the Shah had with the United States, and they don't even care that Shah was a dictatorship because looking back, many of them do not consider Shah to be a dictator ruler because they compare it to today, and they see Shah at the White House sitting next to the First Lady. They see Shah at the Pentagon. They see Shah's family in Florida, and it basically makes them upset, the general young Iranians. And even the conservative Iranians that are right now entering state institutions and become part of the power structure, they do not have a good image and view of the clerics. And they distance themselves, even those Iranians distance themselves from the clerics. And the revolutionary guards are very well aware of these trends. They're very smart, they know what's going on in the society, and some part of their internal tug of war within the Revolutionary Guard is what to do next without bringing about a drastic, radical change. They think that they should change gradually, and President Rouhani represents that view. President Rouhani has been talking about sensitive social issues. He's been advocating more women participation in the workforce. He's talking about, even though it's very difficult, he's talking about a reform to reduce the corruption levels. So he's from that, he represents that view. With regard to Israel and Iran, it's interesting that the cultural relationship, the relationship between Jews and Persians goes back to more than 2,500 years. And that was Cyrus the Great, or Cyrus, under the Achaemenid dynasty, who liberated the Jews from Babylon and brought them and rebuilt the temple. That was the Persian king Cyrus. And Cyrus actually integrated the Jews within the Persian society. And the history between these two nations goes back all the way to this period. And the Jews became powerful advisors within the Persian courts, specifically under the Achaemenid dynasty. And Esther, the Persian queen, everybody knows about. She was the first lady, so to speak. So the cultural relations between the two nations still very strong, but it is the ideology that keeps them, ideology and strategic rivalry. The Iranians can't, the Iranian mindset, because of what I described in my presentation, the Iranian mindset cannot accept that this region should be dominated by a tiny country called Israel, and Israelis, for their own reasons, they can't see the region dominated by Iran for a number of reasons. So that's a strategic rivalry.
Ruth, then Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Reza, you mentioned a magic word just now, Babylon. Could you comment on Iraq, please?
Iraq? What's going on in Iraq?
How is Iraq's current situation
Oh.
going to affect the relationship between Iran and
The Iraqi government is a Shiite-run government, Prime Minister Maliki. He is under the influence of Iranian leadership, particularly the Revolutionary Guard, and many people regard him to be a stooge of Iran. He has proved fairly incompetent as a leader in Iraq because he intensified the Shiite-Sunni tensions in Iraq, and now he's paying for it. The Sunni Shiite violence in Iraq in the Sunni provinces is getting worse. There are Sunnis that are in alliance with the extremist Sunnis in Syria. The violence is becoming cross-border. Prime Minister Maliki has gotten close to Iran way too much, to the extent that now he doesn't have any credibility within the Arab region, within the Arab world. The Arab states simply despise him because of how he has managed the country and intensified the Sunni-Shiite rivalry and violence. However, on the other hand, the Iraqi oil production is still increasing. Iraq is doing very well in terms of oil production. It is going to increase, and it's going to put Saudis under pressure. And the moment that Iran starts to become able, when Iran is able to revitalize its oil industry or its energy sector, it's going to put even more pressure on world oil prices, and which means more pressure on the Saudis. The Saudis are also concerned about this prospect.
Fred, you had a question?
Yeah. Hypothetically speaking, if free elections were to be held in Iran, genuine free elections, and all the various political parties that have been historically involved in Iran, such as especially before the revolution, who basically no longer exist in Iran, so such as the socialists, the leftists or the communists, the religious nationalists, the secular nationalists, and even the monarchy. If there were free elections and all these political groups participated, in your opinion, who do you think at the current moment might potentially emerge as the winner?
It's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult question. But the more, I would argue, even though, because Iran is very, very difficult to predict, it's a very difficult place to predict. I would say that if you say those parties A, B, C, D, E, F, G participated in that election, that free election, I would say out of these A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the most secular oriented party would win because of the incredible level of frustration that Iranians have with this theocracy. I would say the most secular of those parties would get the most votes.
So if you have free elections, if you really leave it up to the people and see what the majority have to
I would say that the most secular of those parties would get the most votes. My grandmother, who passed away years ago, it was a type of a woman who would cover her hair all the time, except not in front of us. But and she went to Mecca. She would go to these religious practices. She was a Shiite Muslim. And before her death, she was during the praying time. This is interesting. During her prayer time, she would pray for the death of the clergy.
Tough old bird.
And she would genuinely pray, literally pray during the day, five times daily prayers. God, please kill them. something like that. And she never ever drank alcoholic beverages throughout her life.
Over here, got a question here? Yes.
Yeah, Reza, two questions. One is that a few years ago I read in the Canadian Army Journal, it's almost like a footnote, but a really huge one, that during the First World War, that the Persian Empire was neutral, but because all the ports and the railways around it were cut off, that a huge proportion of the population died and starved to death. And so I was just wondering, here we have, several decades later, it's like history's repeating itself, where you have this country that on one hand is it's showing its vulnerability to isolation, but then also it starts raising that question as to whether or not there's a sense of desire for independence from those outside influences, or an ability to sort of rely on their own. And so I was wondering if that sort of factors into any of these things we've spoken about today. And then secondly, back to the issue of Israel, I was wondering that while the sort of religious rhetoric may be something that's sort of on the way out, certainly some of the conflicts in that region, especially surrounding the Palestinians, admits to at least a sort of secular interpretation. And so I was wondering how that might also influence the sort of modern sort of secular Iranians' understanding of the tensions with Israel.
Their view of Israel and Palestinian conflict?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Iran's foreign policy towards Palestinians can be described in one word: very manipulative, very manipulative. Iran is first and foremost concerned about its strategic interests, and it's a great tool to put pressure on Israelis. The Palestinian conflict is a very good tool, and they have been using it, a very good tool to put Israel under pressure. And there's another tool, Hamas, and then there's another tool called Hezbollah. There are many in Iran who believe that Iran should not spend its resources, its financial resources, on Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And there have been journalists and university students who have been arrested and put in jail for publishing articles criticizing Iranian foreign policy toward Israel and Palestinians. However, because it's an ideological state, and it's one of the key defining characteristic of the Iranian state ideology, it is very difficult to relinquish that ideology, and that is enmity with Israel. And many of them don't believe in it, but it's part of the state ideology. You can't get away from it. There are others who believe that Iran should have normal relations with Israel, and they say, and this is what they say, not to become incarcerated or put in jail. They say we can have relations with the Israelis, and as sort of in a friendly relations, not necessarily as their allies, put pressure on them to make their behavior change their behavior towards the Palestinian conflict. And that you can see journalists and former policymakers and people in Iranian universities who are of that view. And your first question was?
Just back to this whole history of the Persians being starved in the First World War and how it factors into the current.
Well, that was because I don't know the numbers, but a fair number of Iranians died because of hunger in World War II. But under the Reza Shah, the father of Shah, who was toppled, he was viewed as a threat during the World War II because he got too close to the Germans, and he identified with the German Aryan ideology for reasons that you probably know, and he was seen as a threat by the British and by the Allies, and the country was actually he was abdicated in 1941, but the war continued until 44-45. But during that period, Iran was in a big turmoil, and the loss of life because of hunger comes mainly from that period. Iran didn't have a king or ruler or monarchy during that time. Reza Shah was sent into exile in South Africa. Reza Shah, the father of Shah that was toppled. But Iranians have that sense of independence, and fierce sense of independence comes from a mindset that is historically aware that we were this, we were that, and we don't deserve to be treated like this. And you can see that in the statements of many Iranian politicians and policymakers. We don't deserve to be treated like this. We don't deserve to be treated like a second tier or a third tier power. We used to be this, we used to be that. It's a mentality that is very easy to notice if you know the history of Iran, and it makes itself visible from time to time.
During the discussion between Farid Zakaria and Rouhani, one word caught my attention: pride. Rouhani said it's our pride, and that goes to the mindset. And one of the mistakes I think that Western diplomats have made is that they are not cognizant of the weight of that mindset. For example, it's not politic when talking to Iran or about Iran to talk about the dismantling of their nuclear facilities. It's not dismantling. They may have used the word in the documents, but they don't. The Iranians don't want that to be brought out. Let's go ahead and keep our pride.
Exactly. Thank you for underlining that issue. Exactly. They basically say that this nuclear program is our national pride. It's part of our pride, and we're not going to give it up. They may have taken more than a few steps back, but they certainly don't want the public to know about those steps. And it comes from that mentality, a proud mentality because of their historical background. And President Rouhani said that this is our pride, that, as Mr. Glickman mentioned. He even, during the campaign, on a related note, during the presidential campaign, Rouhani said, this is very interesting, I will restore the credibility, and it was at a university. It was a packed auditorium with female and male university students, and he said, I will restore the credibility of the Iranian passport.
Reza, in your talk, you addressed the fact that Russia had cooperated in enforcing nuclear sanctions on Iran, but otherwise you didn't greatly play up Russia's role in vis-a-vis Iran. Could you talk a little bit to that relationship? I could perfectly understand why Moscow would not like to see nuclear weapons in Tehran. But could you talk a little bit more about the ongoing relationship?
The Russian strategic interests in Iran over the past 30 years, three and a half decades, have vacillated in starkly different directions. In the 1980s, they supported Saddam Hussein and provided Saddam with all sorts of weaponry. minus nuclear. In the 90s, they became involved in rearming Iran because Iran was left on its own and needed to rebuild its military. They started to help Iran with rebuilding its military infrastructure, and then they became involved because the French and the Germans left. The two initial contractors that started Iran's nuclear program under the Shah, under a program called Atom for Peace program, and supported by MIT in the United States. And the initial engineers all came from MIT. So the program was basically abandoned after the revolution, and under the Rafsanjani presidency, they decided to restore the program and produce nuclear energy. The Russians became heavily involved, and that's also another contradiction of Russian policy toward Iran. And while they are the dominant player in Iran's nuclear program, in a monopolistic way, yet again you see a contradictory behavior from Russia. They refuse to sell highly advanced air defense missile systems, S-300. So but they have a fairly good presence in the Iranian market. They have influence over Iranian foreign policy in some cases. They have been playing an influential role in bringing Iran to the table, to the negotiating table. So the Russian involvement in Iran is a little bit sketchy. You can't say they belong to this road. They have been in different lanes, if you wish. If it's a highway and with 5 lanes, they have been in all these 5 lanes. They haven't been in one single lane and follow a certain policy. And they have concerns right now. Their key concern is right now, the Russian concern in Iran is whether Iran would tilt toward the West strategically. And it's a big concern for Russia. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but it could happen because of that generational shift. And if the Western companies or Americans invest heavily in Iran, things are going to change. And they also are fearful of losing their dominance in Iran's nuclear program, because Iran's nuclear program is not about one single reactor in Bushehr. There are multiple sites, and the infrastructure is Russian, of course. And they basically say, what if the French enter the Iranian nuclear market? So that's one of their key strategic concerns, losing the Iranian market. Apart from having contradictory policy toward Iran over the past 3 decades.
Time for one last question.
Well, just a little bit of trivia. My uncle, who served with the British Army through 1946, surprised the family one day by pointing out that he knew a little bit of Farsi and had been in Tehran and had been in Isfahan. So when we pressed him, well, why would you have been there? He had been sent there in 1945 to do an intelligence assessment on the Russian military capability, because at that time, I wasn't aware of this obviously, but at that time the Russians had moved into northern Iran at the end of the war.
Yes.
It did not look like they were planning on leaving.
That's right.
And Whitehall had a tremendous concern about this.
And they took a portion of the Iranian territory, actually.
Bingo. And apparently, from his perspective, this was a very serious issue that resulted in this intelligence action being taken. And I guess they averted whatever they were expecting. But very serious event. So Russia, I think, for a long time has had interest in Iran.
And Russia would also love to have its presence along the Iranian coast in the Persian Gulf. They would love to. I don't know if there are, but I doubt that if they have. They may have sent one or two naval ships, warships, for a few days, but I don't think they have a established presence there. Thank you very much.
This concludes today's webcast. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening. You can keep up with coming events at the RCMI by visiting our website at www.rcmi.org. We hope you'll tune in again, and we hope to see you in person at coming events. Thank you and goodbye.